All right, we'll jump right in. So, hi guys, happy Friday. Thanks for joining us. Hope everybody's hanging in there and staying healthy. Since I can't see you, I just assume everybody's healthy. For those who don't know me, I'm Jamie Vigiano. I'm the CMO at Fuel Capital. My primary job here is to support the portfolio on all things marketing, whether that be PR, brand strategy, growth. I've seen a lot and I've gotten a lot of questions over the last few weeks, as you can imagine. So at the end of March, we kicked off our webinar series with a webinar about branding in the age of coronavirus. And in that webinar, we tackled questions like, how do I do branding at this time without sounding tone deaf? How do I engage with our customers? What do they need most from us right now, if anything? And then what role does marketing play in helping the whole company shift to the new reality? And that feels like a lifetime ago. It was a mere 5 weeks ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago. And it feels that way because the conversation continues to shift and evolve so dramatically. And as you saw over the last week or so, the conversation has shifted, the national conversation has shifted from shelter in place to a potential reopening of society. And although there's no hard answers right now, it does feel like the world is starting to emerge again. So we thought it would be a good time to start talking about how brands start to emerge themselves and refocus, or maybe focus for the first time on growth. And there's no better person to help us do that than Susan Su. And before we jump into questions, just a little bit about Susan. Susan is a startup growth advisor, angel investor, and growth marketing leader. She is currently at Sound Ventures as growth expert in residence. Previously, she held positions of growth at Stripe, was an in-house growth advisor at 500 Startups, and ran growth marketing as the founding team at Reforge, where she also owned brand marketing. She has worked closely with companies as big as Nike and as small as a two-person startup. Her work and experience spans consumer, specifically mobile, e-commerce, and media, and B2B SaaS companies. So Susan, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's so great to see everybody. And just like special shout out to, let's see, who all am I going to shout out? Shane, Lee, Jamie, and myself for having our video on. I was like, who all is on this list? Wait a second. It's a very short list, so I'm going to have to include myself on it.
Yeah.
It's so great.
Photos of Olivia and Joel. At least we got some photos in there too.
Yay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Joel. Hi, Michelle. Yin Yin, nice to see you. Yin Yin, you have the perfect wall for a virtual background. It's almost like a green screen, but white. So great to be here and so nice to meet you all. I've heard that you guys are a really fun early stage bunch. I've heard that from Jamie, so she might be a little bit biased. Really excited to jump in and talk a little bit about what we're seeing and what we can start planning for. And one thing I want to comment on, Jamie kept saying the word emerge. I think that's an interesting verb. We're definitely emerging, but I would hope that nobody has been like completely in hibernation over the past 6 weeks. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know that was one of the questions of like, how much should we be, kind of hunkering down and waiting this out versus actually taking proactive action. So we'll get into that from a marketing perspective, that is. And so Jamie, I don't know if we want to start with questions here or just like get into some of the topics. Like I'm down for whatever.
Cool. All right. So one logistical note, if anybody has any questions as we go, feel free to privately chat me or publicly chat, whatever you're most comfortable with. This is meant to be super helpful to you guys and your businesses. So please ask us questions as we go. We got some questions ahead of time and we'll go through those, but again, feel free to pop in chat with any questions. But where I'd like to start is on the paid acquisition side. I think most people equate growth with paid acquisition, so it's probably best to start there. And I'm curious if there's been any shifts in strategy that you're seeing on the paid acquisition side, or any trends that you're seeing that are noteworthy?
Yeah, I feel like the whole most people associate growth with paid acquisition. That could be its own, like, not even just webinar, but it's literally a series.
Right.
And I promise to come back for that so that I may rant at length about all.
Although hopefully it's changing after this crisis. We'll see.
I think so, for sure. I mean, yeah. So we won't go there, but for sure there are a lot of really interesting trends on the paid side, and I think paid is really important, right? Like, it's not, there is a certain refrain in the group growth community that's a little bit down on paid. Like, ironically, it's the cheap way to grow. It's not cheap, but sort of, it's like a cheat, right? And cheat with a T at the end. And I don't believe that's true. I think that there's a lot that we can learn, and we should actually embrace our ads. We should love our ads. Like, there's a lot that they can do for us. So in terms of trends, what we're seeing, and this is not information that I've gotten from like a report or anything like that. This is purely anecdotal, so take it with a grain of salt. But we're seeing that paid spend is down an average of 30 to 40 to even 50% across the board, depending on channels, depending on your audiences. And when I say we, I'm talking about companies that I work with, agency partners that I work with. So in addition to working with our portfolio companies at Sound, I also advise companies outside of Sound. I'm either, their equity advisor, or I am working with them in some other type of capacity on growth for their company. And we're seeing that across the board on all channels, things are getting cheaper. And that's a factor of, I think everybody sort of knows about this, but there's obviously dramatically increased inventory across most channels as screen time is through the roof. Do you guys get like those screen time notifications on your device every week? And it's like, don't tell me this week, your screen time is up 79%. Like, I know. Thanks for making me feel like a horrible person yet again. I can't help
Or
it.
a parent because your kid's stealing your phone. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. When you find out that your screen time is up like 80% because a child has been using it, frightening. So yeah, there's definitely lots of inventory, but you obviously have to be very smart on how you use it. So in terms of changes in strategies, one thing that I think is a really interesting trend is that before, what you actually had, and I'm stealing this from my paid acquisition master buddy who's named Cliff. It's not my own thing. But before, what you were seeing a lot of was that brands, especially bigger brands, were spending on, especially Facebook, at a like 0.8 or 0.9 ROAS. So not even reaching break even. And they were doing this on purpose because it was their performance brand strategy. So performance brand is not really like a term yet, but maybe like we'll all write a bunch of blog posts about it and then we'll make it a thing. But essentially, the way that I think about performance brand, typically brand is very hard to attribute. It's a lot of activities that are a much longer arc. And more about general awareness and some affinity than performance or growth marketing. But with performance brand, what you're doing is you're really just paying to have those impressions appear in front of people. And you don't care, your priority is not on whether they click, whether they convert, you're just looking for that impression. And so one big trend is that big advertisers are stopping with that type of spend, which is great news for smaller, nimbler companies, because that frees up, that basically eliminates a lot of your your deepest pocketed competition and frees up all of that inventory for an opportunity for startups. And if you think about like what's happening in the landscape, like we have these malls that are closed for weeks on end. We have companies like Macy's literally about to go bankrupt. I really would not be surprised if we see a lot of those kind of insolvency events happening over the next 12 months in some of these legacy brands. And so I think here is a good opportunity to look at your own category and say, okay, who are the legacy brands in my category and how can I start picking them off one at a time, because I have a different business model or I have a different level of agility in my marketing. Like, how can I get in where they can't come anymore? So I think that's a really interesting trend, is that these bigger brands are like moving away from these kind of activities that were essentially inflating the ecosystem for everybody. Mm-hmm. So it's like you had many, many Mike Bloombergs buying up all of the ads. And then I think the other thing is that, like, just take a look around us, like look at your
own lives, are you buying stuff? If you click on ads, are you buying stuff after you click on the ads? Did you buy anything that was a discretionary purchase over the last 6 to 8 weeks? Probably not. Or if you did, it was really minimal. And if it was anything that was like a little bit of a higher price point purchase, it was going to, the level of consideration that you would give it now versus the level of consideration, let's say even in January or December, is really different. That mirrors, by the way, it's a metaphor for how investors are thinking of startups, right? So like the same company that maybe you would have diligenced to a certain level, you're suddenly going way above and beyond. It's like this moving target of standards. And I think for consumers, it's the exact same. For enterprise buyers, it's all the exact same, right? We're all getting super, super risk averse because our perception is that we're living in this extraordinarily high risk, high uncertainty time. And so bringing that back to performance marketing, what that means is that people are just not going to convert in the same way as they used to. And that's okay. They're not going to convert, but that doesn't mean that you should stop marketing to them, because conversion isn't the only reason we market to customers. And so right now, basically what I'm seeing on paid is that there's a lot more. We want to use paid to focus on the bottom of funnel conversions as much as we possibly can, just because, again, like there is nothing that beats $1 today. Would way rather have $1 today than like a couple of leads this afternoon or whatever it is, for the most part. But when conversions are just not happening because of your product category or because of your price point or whatever reason, then I still think it's a really important opportunity to look at lead generation, so that you can continue to build out a really, really strong nurture pipeline. And when people are getting more back into normal, when people are ready to spend again, that you have a built-in, nice, fresh, not stale, not tired email list that you can then remarket to on the back end.
Yeah.
Even in good times, 99% of your buyers are not going to buy on the front end. They are going to buy on the back end, meaning they need to be retargeted via paid or via email. But don't despair if you can't capture a conversion right now, as long as you can capture a contact.
Yep. Yeah. And one question coming in off of that is, are there any good data resources for what legacy companies are spending? And one data point that's very prevalent or easy to find is the decrease in impressions, click-through rates, and conversions for the main channels online, like Facebook. If you look at Facebook, some of the data is CPMs fell about 20% from February to March. They plunged, CPCs plunged 30% in that same time horizon. And as Susan was saying, conversions dropped by 50%. So you have all these people in front of their devices perusing, perhaps clicking, but you're seeing that major drop off down the conversion funnel to payment and actual buying. But which brands and by how much are they decreasing? I haven't seen any data resources on that. Have you seen any, Susan?
I haven't, and I would be really surprised if brands would reveal that. But I can just tell you, again, anecdotally, one of our companies that's in the sound portfolio, they work with big brands on performance, on like creating a certain type of creative asset for performance campaigns, and they said that about 75% of their typical advertisers have just completely just gone dark. And so I think there's, poor them, of course, they're like definitely fighting that fire right now. But, I don't know the exact number, but if you look at like the trends in consumer spending, there's, I think in the apparel category, I saw this in the New York Times. So this is not like fancy proprietary. It's very fancy, but it's not proprietary information. I think it was like, they had this really cool interactive graphic visual thingy. And it said that in apparel, it was down 60%, which is really interesting because I have 2 apparel companies that I advise, one of whom, and I was telling Jamie this earlier, just a shocking result. They had their best month ever in March. And then in the first week of April, they did all of the revenue that they did in March in 1 week, the first week of April. And they're not doing any email marketing yet because they're super early. They are using a free Facebook ads
person from their accelerator. Like, you know how the accelerators will have like folks on staff to help out like a couple hours a week. That's their paid acquisition person. So it's pretty astonishing. Another e-commerce brand that's more just like general fashion. They are basically compared year over year compared to 2019, they're about the same actually. Wow. So when you see those numbers, like 60% lower spending in apparel, you've got to think, okay, well, if that's not 60% across the board, evenly split between everybody, then that means for some legacy incumbents, that's going to be 90, 95%. You know, if we have a company that's like doing 200K in revenue in 1 week in April, and that's like a record shattering week for them, then you've got to believe that Macy's is really hurting right now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think just having that analog of decrease in spend, maybe as a proxy for their decrease in marketing budget, just so they hold constant, theoretically, is probably a good way to think about it. But net, where we started this conversation, I think that does present opportunities for smaller brands to raise their profile and perhaps, you know, make some headway against the incumbents in the space. So,
and actually one other thing I wanted to mention here, because I think we were talking, Jamie, you mentioned that conversions were down 50%, but you know, in some data we're showing it's down 50%. I think it's also like, it's asking ourselves, what experiences can we create for our audience that aren't about conversion? So one of the things I was working on when I was working with Nike Adventure Club, which is a startup outside from within Nike that is now its own product line, is creating this idea of it's a subscription e-commerce. And so we started thinking, okay, well, obviously most people, like for every business, most people are not going to be a subscription customer or a customer at all. So how do we continue to have a relationship with them? And we started thinking through this idea of a free subscription, a free tier. Just like, you know, you'll have with SaaS, we have a free tier and you still have a way to use the product. You still have a way to touch and interact with the brand. Now that sounds kind of silly. Like if you sell shoes, what is your free product? And in their case, it's a little bit not just shoes because they include games. It's for kids, and so they include games and like different activities within the packs, within each send. So there's something that they could sort of like build off of. But I think it's really an interesting challenge right now to ask ourselves, okay, if conversion is down by 50%, then what other non-conversion experiences that are still worthwhile, that can still drive brand attach, can we roll out in this period that would make sense? And maybe, you know, again, I always say, don't roll out anything just for coronavirus. Make sure that you're getting maximum mileage for anything that you're doing. Are there those opportunities that would make sense now and in the new future, in the new normal that's to come?
Mm-hmm. Interesting question coming through. There are some categories that are growing significantly, groceries being one, food another. But how do you take advantage of the macro trend of marketing spend going down in industries that are actually performing at this point? Any thoughts on that?
So how do you take advantage of the fact that people are spending less on marketing in big industries like grocery and like in industries where there's like a natural demand driving?
Or overall,
growth?
the spend going down overall, how do you take advantage, even if you're in a space that happens to be doing well?
Oh, I mean, now is the land grab. Like, just go and buy that up. Like, if you are counter cyclical during this time, I mean, now is the time to be working. I would be like, if your team is not working 7 days a week, and I hate saying that. I hate like saying, oh, we all need to be like working in a factory like slaves, that kind of thing. That's not my attitude at all. But I also believe in seasonality, and this is your season. If you are countercyclical and you're having a good time during coronavirus, this is like your all hands on deck harvest season. Think about it like that. And you can rest later once you've like grown your business 50% quarter over quarter or whatever target you end up hitting. So yeah, I definitely think not just with paid, and I think now is a really, really good time to be buying up paid, and especially to be like, hey, if you're doing so great and you're so flush, then focus on lead ads and get leads for the future, so that, look, whenever you're on Facebook or any paid channel, you're on rented turf. Never forget that. And your job is to do two things simultaneously. One is like, while you're on that rented turf, get some customers. And that's, you know, the first and foremost, that's the primary thing. But the secondary thing is, while you're on that rented turf, get as many people over onto owned turf as possible. And that specifically means your email, your SMS, your channels where you actually get to own the marketing follow-up, the communication that you do from there. And if you're doing really well and you have extra money to spend on paid channels, I would focus on generating leads. And then later on, you can either dial back spend or keep spend the same, but you'll be able to continue to grow the bottom line through owned channel remarketing.
Yeah. And I do think there's definitely opportunity outside of digital where advertisers probably have retrenched even more, namely out of home. And I know, Susan, you have some great thoughts on this, but this is potentially an area to explore as the big brands are no longer doing out of home and have completely withdrawn their budget there. There are some steals to be had, whether that be on subway or bus or billboards. And Susan, I know you have a great recommendation on that you want to share with the group.
Yeah, so we were chatting about this earlier, and I think what's interesting, I'll just preface this with saying, like, even though, you know, we are supposedly like having this 3-phase plan being rolled out and things are looking positive again and everybody's desensitized and blasé. Like Jamie and I were talking earlier about how like people are slowly devolving, like, you know, they're not walking as far apart from each other anymore, and they're not as scared they're not spraying down their doorknobs in the same way as they were 3 weeks ago. Even as that's happening, we have to keep in mind that the COVID reality is going to be here for a while, at least the next 6 months, if not much longer. And so, you know, right now we might not see a big opportunity to swoop in and get deals, but in a couple of months, especially for out of home, not even a couple of months, I think in a couple of weeks, that is going to be very, very true, because for out of home, which is like billboard, any surface that you see when you leave your house. So like billboards, like bus stop benches, like, you know, posters at the airport, even those like, TSA trays at the airport. Sometimes they'll have like advertising on them. So all like, taxi tops, all of that kind of stuff, elevator, wallpaper or whatever it is. So all of that stuff is in the out of home category. Obviously, since we're all at home, you know, like out of home is really hurting. And I think that's a really good opportunity for companies that want to build brand awareness quickly, by running an awareness campaign. Like you could actually go to these providers and say, hey, like, can we buy a few months out at a discount? And you can potentially start to negotiate some more favorable terms there, especially because even if right now they still have like, you know, they have a good fill rate because their cycles might be long, like some of their previous advertisers might not have had a chance to like pull out yet, but they're probably not renewing. But if they're on like a 1 or 2 or 3 month cycle, their ads might still be up. But at some point that's going to come down, and what is there going to be there, right? So I think there's a really, really interesting opportunity there. And the recommendation that Jamie was alluding to is this company here in LA called AdQuick. And they're like kind of a hybrid sort of, they're trying to transition away from being an agency. But I think what's really great about the agency side of their business is that they have this really great white glove service. They can really help you. A lot of startups don't know that much about out of home. So sometimes it's beneficial to have a partner that can actually kind of walk you through what that world is all about. But interesting factoid about out of home. So there are tens or maybe even hundreds of millions of surfaces across the US, and there are thousands of providers that own those services. So you probably know about like Clear
Channel.
Clear Channel, and then there's one that's like Outdoor something in the Bay. I just like the Bay Area is so full of billboards. Like I just know the ones that I see very commonly there, but
We know those as the household names, but there's so many other providers that own the other surfaces. And so it's a very, very fragmented as well as essentially like analog offline process. And so what's really great about AdQuick is that they've aggregated almost all of those providers into one place. So you don't have to like send a bunch of PDF attachments back, literally fax PDF attachments back and forth with your like account manager at Clear Channel or whatever it is. And so they just have that aggregated for you, and you're able to do really small tests as small as a week for like 25K.
And typically for folks who don't know Out of Home, it's usually a 4-week run as a minimum. So if you could do a 1-week run, that's huge.
Yeah, and you can get really precise with the locations. Like I think, even if you're only in a certain geo, like that's actually perfect because it can be challenging to get super specific geo targeting on online, like scaled channels. But with Out of Home, let's say you're only in Atlanta or something like that. You only do business in Atlanta so far. I mean, you can definitely just focus on Atlanta. You can focus on specific neighborhoods in Atlanta. And I think it's not technically Out of Home, but the other opportunity here that a lot of startups miss out on is in direct mail. Mm-hmm. And I think direct mail is another one of those that's great for like, if you want to get really precise about geo and you want to be able to, because a lot of the direct mail information, the data that powers it is driven by like voter rolls. So they know a lot of information about people. They, like know as much as you can tell about somebody based on how they vote and how much their home is worth and how much they make, which is a lot of information. And the company that I really like for direct mail, which is like kind of like what AdQuick has done for Out of Home, but like way more and even better, is called Posty. And they're sort of taking more of like a performance approach to direct mail, where they have, I think the last time I talked to them it's been a little while, but they had over 13 million like data points, or I think that sounds low. I'm sure it was more than that, but they have really, really good coverage in the United States. They have dashboards where you can run those campaigns the way that you would in Facebook, basically. And so, I think direct mail is one of those things where like, if you have anything to do with the home, if you have anything, even fashion, even SaaS, like I could see a lot of use cases for direct mail.
Well, I'm looking at a few folks here, like grocery food, that could be a great thing to experiment with. I know one of our other portfolio companies has a big push around direct mail right now too. Yeah, people are home, guys. That's where you find them. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good bet that people are going to be home. I want to talk a little bit of, stay on paid for a little bit more and talk about, if we're not going to ramp budget substantially, what are other ways we can use paid as testing ground for the brand right now? How much testing should be done cross-channel, or how much should be done on a single channel? That's one question coming in. But maybe we start, if we're not ramping spend from an acquisition standpoint as a primary goal, what are other ways you can use paid media, or digital or otherwise, to test right now?
So I think this really depends on where you're at in the life cycle of your company, like the stage wise and just in terms of marketing maturity. But one thing that I can see right away is a really cool opportunity to use pay to actually de-risk some of your brand efforts. So I love brand marketing. I also hate brand marketing. The thing that I hate about it is that it's so hard to know when you're right. But when you are right, oh my God, it's amazing, right? And the thing is that it's so expensive to do. And so we obviously want to the extent possible, de-risk as much as we can before we start putting down, 6-7 figures for a big brand marketing push. Right. And so paid, specifically like Facebook and Instagram, that's a really good way to do what I, kind of like this dark testing of really simple things, even just like concepts. So everybody knows about message testing on Facebook and looking for, engagement and click-throughs on specific messages. But even at the conceptual level, right? So like above a message, before you get to a message, sorry, you can't see my hand, but above a message, you have like an actual concept. And related to that concept, you'd have like maybe many different messages that you could test. And you want to know not only which message resonates, but also which concept. So does, a time-saving concept, time-saving positioning make more sense, or an increased productivity positioning make more sense? Does convenience messaging make more sense, or cost saving messaging make more sense? So I think that's where you can actually start to just learn a lot, even if you feel like, okay, we're not in a we have a lot of companies in our portfolio too that are just like, we're not that focused on monetizing right now, we're building ahead, or they're like some deep tech company that doesn't need customers because they're still on core product. I still say now is a really great time, because you're not going to see prices like this. I feel like such a salesperson for ads right now, but I really do believe that we're not going to see this type of availability for a while. And I think it's a great time to just try some stuff that you otherwise maybe under normal circumstances would not want to dedicate the time or the money to do, because you're just doing other stuff.
Right. And a consideration there is creative development, particularly if you're thinking about large form factors, less digital. You're going to have to do that in-house potentially, particularly if there's photo shoots or whatever. I mean, that's something to consider as they think about the content creation for these ads. I was just looking at an ad for Carter's, the kid company, the clothing company, and they just pushed out a commercial that is actually beautifully done. To the question of, do I know any of promotions that have been beautifully done? This one is, and if we have time, I can share it. But it was developed in their employees' homes. So literally it's the employees filming their kids and doing this beautiful campaign that they managed 100% in-house. So that is something to consider going forward if you are going to spend and test some of these channels. A lot of the creative development may be done in-house and by you.
Yeah.
So want to shift gears a bit to the organic side and focusing on organic growth. How should brands be thinking about organic as a source of growth at this time? We kind of alluded to it earlier about community development and potentially leveraging your own channels, email being one. But any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in general, and this is related to this webinar that we're all part of right now. I think right now is an audience building time. It's a community building time, more than anything. So for sure, we want to, again, like I will repeat this over and over again, of course, like $1 today is better than the promise of $1 tomorrow, or the promise of $2 tomorrow. In general, for most businesses, especially at the early stages. But I also think that if that's not happening for whatever external reasons that are beyond your control, then what you can still control is really using this time to focus on building an audience and a community around your company. I think every brand can have a community around it. There's literally no, like, even if you're in some kind of like gov tech hole, I think you can still have a community around your brand. And it's one of those things where, again, when it's business as usual, it's very hard for us to justify, because similar to brand investments, we don't necessarily see the ROI in a really, really tight, short time frame. And so for early stage startups that are looking to hit specific quantitative milestones, in order to raise the next round or whatever it is, that, that can fall by the wayside. But I think right now, because of a confluence of all of these different factors, everything from, the increase in screen time and like just this captive audience dynamic that we have here, to the fact that I think actually I think there's something happening at the societal level where people actually are suddenly tuning in. Like, this is a thing where they realize, like, oh, I can't just like not pay attention to what's going on in the world anymore, because if I don't pay attention, I could literally get sick and die, or somebody I know could get sick and die. So it's becoming much more, it's not just a factor of staying at home and having more time. I think it's also like that level of, how do you say that? The engagement, the depth of engagement with content is much higher as well. And so I would be focusing primarily on what are all of the ways that we can build a community. And you can get so creative there. And it's very, very custom to every brand. So there's no like
one size fits all, but you know, it's everything from remote experiences like this webinar to you know, maybe there are things that you can be doing live, you know, live streaming, to maybe there are things that you can be doing just from like a textual or visual content perspective. People are looking to connect with not just you and your brand, but also with one another. And if you can be the hub that brings people together to make those even minorly meaningful connections, like you have somebody upvotes your comment on Reddit and makes you feel good, that's, I think, a win for
Yep.
Reddit. So that's how I would be thinking about it, is really like, okay, how can I use this time to amass the largest audience possible? Because that's never not going to come in handy.
Right, right. So related to the organic side, another key driver of growth outside of filling top of funnel is retention. So some companies may grow simply by retaining and engaging, re-engaging with their current customer base. How should brands think about the marrying of those two and the prioritization of those two during this time?
I just always think that retention is the number one. If you don't have strong retention, then just you probably really need to prioritize that before focusing on acquisition. I say that, but every business is a little bit different. I mean, not every business is going to even have what you could call retention. If it's like Joy, you guys know Joy. Some of you guys know Joy. I mean, you know, what does retention mean for Joy after it's a wedding SaaS? So after your wedding is over, how do you define retention for Joy? They have a natural churn point, and that is okay. They should not want to necessarily keep all of their, like how could they keep getting married? No, don't do that.
We have Leah Sienna on the phone, who's a wedding dress retailer. So yes, similar situation.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. But so for these like one and done or episodic experiences, I think there's still an opportunity. You know, I think Jamie and I have talked about this before, but I think about retention and splitting it up into like 3 types of retention. You have dollar retention, which is, you know, somebody's still spending money with your business. That makes the most sense. It's very cut and dry. You also have product retention. They're not spending money. They may or may not be spending money, but they're still interacting with your product. And then you have brand retention. They may or may not be spending money. They may or may not be using your actual product anymore, but they are still retained. They're still connected to your brand. And so if you are doing wedding dresses, you know, you might not be able to have dollar retention. You might not be able to even have product retention once, you know, the said event is over. But you can still think about what are the ways that we can build brand retention. And again, it doesn't have to be forever, but how can we extend brand retention a little bit longer? Because if I'm the wedding dress company, I'm thinking, okay, after her wedding, I want to engage that buyer because she is going to get so many questions from all of her friends about where she got her dress, who did the tailoring, and not right away. It's not like, ooh, your dress is so cute. Where did you get that? It's like, it's my wedding dress. I've been planning this for 9 months. So it's not exactly like that type of casual word of mouth referral, but where it happens right away, but it will happen. It will happen at some point, especially if you believe in the strength of your product, the dresses themselves. And so how do you set yourself up from a brand retention perspective so that you just roll off the tongue and you do not miss that referral opportunity in the future? So that's how I think about retention. And, you know, the tools and the tactics for retention are what you'd expect. For the most part on revenue and product retention, your tool for revenue retention, your tools are pricing, playing around with different, like, can you adjust the payment plan? If you're on if you have a bunch of annual contracts, what do you need to do now to prevent you're not churning customers now necessarily, but when they're all coming up due for their annual renewal, you might. Mm-hmm. And so, and that might be in the future. And so how do you prepare for that now? On product retention, is there something that you can do to continue keeping your free users? Can you offer a downgrade? Can you offer some of the features that are part of your pro or your premium tiers just for free? just as a across the board measure so that they keep using your product and don't lose the habit. Because once they lose the habit, it's going to be so hard. You have to pay to acquire them again. You have to pay to onboard them again. And by pay, I mean, just as part of the acquisition process, because there's going to be a lot of drop off in the onboarding. And so you don't want to go through that. I would rather just give them the product for free for a short time in order to just keep them using it. And then on the
value from and deriving value and building the relationship, right?
Right. And driving value in perhaps a more agile way. So like if their needs have changed because of something external on their end, then, how do you need to flex to be able to meet those changing needs?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the brand retention side, I think there's a lot that you can do around storytelling, around creating a community and a content experience that isn't about necessarily using your product. If your product is, let's say, apparel for going to sporting events, those sporting events aren't happening right now. And so I think, that's the way that retention can kind of break down across all those different categories. But I strongly believe that even if you're episodic, there's still a way that you can either keep people knowing about you and thinking about you for a little bit longer than they normally would.
Mm-hmm.
Or bring them back for the next opportunity, start thinking about bringing them back for the next opportunity that they could have to work with your product. Because even if you're a wedding dress company today, maybe in the future, you're going to also do something for the next big event in a person's life. And you want to still, have some relationship with your customer at that point.
Right. Yeah. And I get a lot of hesitancy on the other side when I talk about content development from a customer engagement perspective. I think the number one reaction is, oh, it's so much work. But I do think it pays dividends. People are in front of their screens and are consuming so much content right now, whether it be super relevant to coronavirus or not relevant at all. They're just consuming content. So I do think there is an opportunity right now to double down on content, either as an acquisition strategy or frankly, just as an engagement strategy with your current base.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted, sorry, did you have a point on that?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you completely.
Okay. Want to turn our attention to pivots, because that's been a topic of conversation a lot recently, and talk about, because we are seed stage, a lot of our companies are quite young. How should companies that had product market fit prior to the epidemic, and then maybe have lost it through it, how should they start thinking about pivots and changing their business models in this time?
Okay, well, that is the perfect tee up to, I'm going to share this very humble Google Slides with you guys. It's so humble that I'm not even going to do the presentation mode, because it's going to make things kind of screwy in terms of Zoom. So this is something that some colleagues of mine developed at 500 Startups some years back, and they call it the pivot pyramid. I love this framework because it's really, it's so simple, but it's also really great for thinking through pivots. So basically what the pivot pyramid is saying is that, the foundational layer of the pyramid, which is customers, then problem, then solution, then tech, then growth. The lower down that you get in the pyramid, the harder it is to pivot on that particular element. Because if you pivot on your customers, you literally have to change all of the other stuff that's stacked on top of it in the pyramid. Your growth strategy is very easy to pivot. You can change your growth strategy without changing what your product is, without changing which is the solution layer, without changing necessarily the customers that you're going after. But if you change the market that you're targeting, then you need to fundamentally rethink, is this product still a good fit for this market? If not, then, then you're like in the second, third, and fourth layers of moving upwards of the pyramid. You're having to change all that stuff. And then ultimately you're going to have to change your growth strategy as well. So that's how I think about true pivots. I also think that there is like something around like there's a pivot in your product versus a pivot in just like something much more superficial. So like a product pivot that I can give you guys an example of that I thought was really interesting. A friend of mine is the founder of this company called Stronghold, which was originally building exchange technology on top of blockchain so that you could more quickly buy and sell crypto assets. And then they pivoted into like, okay, we want to be more of like a banking rails for certain types of businesses. So like almost like a payment facilitator, but not tied to a merchant bank here in the US because they are on blockchain. Okay, great. So then all of this coronavirus stuff happened, and they had been wanting to get into cannabis for a little while. But since coronavirus, and like you guys probably know a little bit about the explosion in demand, dispensaries are barely able to keep up. You know, people are at home, they're anxious, blah, 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 self-medicating, all these things. So what Stronghold is doing is now they've built a payment solution for dispensary software. And this is game changing because due to its like, you know, patchwork regulated nature, cannabis is not, you can't pay for any cannabis products with a credit card because most merchant banks like Wells Fargo, which is Stripe's banking partner here in the US, would not be able to process payments for any cannabis related anything. And so that's why you have to pay cash when you go to a dispensary. So with Stronghold, now you can just log in on an iPad, you can log in like a Plaid style to your bank and then connect and just pay via ACH. You do that one time, and then going forward, it's just like a one-click Apple Pay type experience because it's connecting your user account with that dispensary to your actual bank account. So it's a direct payment. I think it's something like that where, you know, that's a pretty big pivot in their product. Of course, they had the Rails already, so they're still using the fundamental infrastructure that they're building, which is great that they were able to reuse their tech. But that's something where they saw, oh my gosh, there's like a really growing, you know, a big and growing need right here. And if we take advantage of it right now, we will actually get to, it's a seed stage company, we'll actually get to profitability in the next 1 month. Wow. Which is huge for them. Yeah. Which is huge for like, that's how it's just exploding in terms of demand. And also because demand is so high, that's also changing buyer and decision maker behavior on the part of dispensaries and on the part of dispensary software providers like Trees and what was the other one, like FlowHub is the other one. And so for them, they're much more amenable to integrating with a partner like that. And so that's like one interesting way that company has spun out. Now, another one that's much more superficial that I wanted to share with you guys, I'm still sharing my screen. Let me just click down to this slide. So this is a company that's in the sound portfolio. It's called Loom. It is like basically you can record quick videos, video communications that are like a how-to, or it could be like, hey, you know, I just set up this email. Here's where you need to go to find it, or here's the right Dropbox folder, like anything like that. So they mainly are used by developers within an organization, educators, outside, you know, any kind of educator, also like customer success and even sales for like doing customer education. And so they right away, they were super early in this. You can see this blog post was dated March 12th, but they actually started sending out some email communications around this even before then, around immediately changing their monetization model in response to COVID. And so they made their pro tier much cheaper, even though for this company, monetization has been one of their biggest, I wouldn't call it a struggle. It's more just they're getting a lot of investor pressure about monetization. And so you have to believe that for these founders, it was a really big decision to say, you know what, we're actually going to cut prices. We're going to remove all limits and basically make a lot of pro elements that would have driven monetization, driven conversion. We're going to make them free because we care more about driving product adoption than about driving revenue retention or revenue acquisition at this point. Right. And I think, unfortunately, I couldn't really show you the full page. If you go to loom.com/blog/coronavirus-response, it's actually worthwhile to check it out because I think they just did a great job in positioning in the copywriting. And then this little black part at the bottom, that's actually a Loom video where Joe, who's the CEO of Loom, he is actually explaining it using his own product, using Illume. I mean, the whole thing is great because right away you're like getting a sense of the product value, you're getting a demonstration of a cool use case, and you're getting some good news, which is, oh my gosh, like I can use use the basic and have unlimited videos all the way until July. Like that's great. That's amazing. So that's a really interesting example of another pivot. And then I wanted to show you one more, or a couple more, which was this one. So speaking of bridal, this company, I believe it is called Katie May. They do I think they primarily do dresses or apparel or something. So I can't remember exactly how I found this site. I think I was looking for masks because I believe that masks are going to be a new accessory that's going to be normalized personally. And so I was kind of just doing some research into that hypothesis, and I found this site and I thought this was amazing. I mean, what? Look at this. Like, how did they do this so quickly? And it's every purchase, they are donating 3 to police officers in Orange County, which is really cool. They also look kind of cool. Like I have to say this pink sequined one, the white sequined one, that's some really interesting styling. And I could see people definitely going for that. So I think that's a really interesting pivot that could lead into something bigger for them. And I just wanted to show you guys this collage.
I just love that tagline, which was started in bridal and now we're here.
Yeah.
That's life. Now we're here. Yeah.
And then, so here I like, cause I've lived in Asia before, and it's very normal for people to wear masks, and they don't wear surgical masks. So I actually think this photo in the first photo that's right under the headline, it's kind of funny because you see like it's evolving from this guy with the N95 mask to people getting more and more creative and personal with their masks. And then the bottom photo, the other photos showing like people on scooters in Southeast Asia, where there's a lot of air pollution, particulate pollution from motor vehicles. They actually just use masks really normally. So I think the other element of a pivot is don't do a pivot that is not going to be beneficial to your business long term. Don't do a pivot just out of the goodness of your heart or to serve frontline healthcare workers, as important as it is to support those people in those functions. But you still have to, like, you're not going to be good to anybody if you're broke on the street, right? So let's keep the lights on and make sure that any pivot that we do is going to be serving the long-term interest of the business. Right. And in order to make sure you're doing that, it's really important to have and to develop your own hypothesis about where you believe consumer society or B2B society, whoever your audience is, where that's going. What is going to be the set of new social norms and behaviors that people in your audience are going to adopt? Is it going to be fashionable face masks? And do you need to incorporate that into your own product roadmap?
Right. Cool. So we have a few more minutes left. I want to go to audience questions real fast. So first one was curious about how to think about pre-sales and referrals during this time, as they've been a key part of the go-to-market thinking for V2 of the product that they're launching in a few months. So how do you think about pre-sales and referrals prior to launch during this time?
So I think that this is a great time for it. And I wanted to show you guys this example. Has anybody here heard of or used Crisp?
Nope.
So it is amazing. I'm using Crisp right now. Let me make sure I have it activated before I show you guys how magical it is. Yes, I do have it activated. So do you guys see this Post-it note I have?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear the Post-it note? Mm-hmm. You can hear it. Okay, so let me. You can hear it now, right?
Yes. And
can you still hear it now?
Yes.
Damn it didn't work. I think it's the mic that I'm using. I swear to anything that I believe it is hi. I think it's the mic that I'm using, but normally what happens is this magical moment of like, I'll do like, can you hear the Post-it note? And people will be like, yeah, it's noisy, please stop. And then I'll turn on the mute noise and it'll be completely muted. So what is really interesting about this app is that it's so relevant right now when everybody's at home. They've got their like dog barking, they've got the trash being collected outside, and it's really noisy. And so it's very fitting for this time. But I also think that their referral program is really, really interesting. It's basically similar to Dropbox with a little bit of a twist, which is that this is a desktop app. And so you basically can like quickly check out to see where it's at any moment when you're on your desktop. And I've referred a few people I've shared like my referral link. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I just said, oh, you should use this app. It's really great. And every time somebody adopts it, I am extending my pro for free. A couple of days ago, I believe this said expires on like sometime in June. And I was like, oh my God, I got it to June 2020. Look at me go. I'm such a good referrer. And now it says October 15th. And so I think what's really interesting about referrals is like, is that most brands do not close the loop on referrals enough. If you do something that somebody asks you to do, if you sell something, don't you want to know if it worked? Don't you want to know if your target customer that you're trying to sell to actually, took you up on it? Don't you want to know if you are actually good at it? Mm-hmm. And so I think what the point is there is that on referrals, and to do them really well, it's really showing that closing of the loop of like, okay, this is how many people that you invited have actually accepted. This is what that means for you. And actually showing people that calculus is really, really motivating for driving better conversion rates on referrals, on actually doing the referrals. So I absolutely think that right now is a really, really good time to be focusing on referrals, pre-sales as well. I mean, the other thing you can be really creative on pre-sales is just say, hey, like, we can offer you a really great payment option if you can pay earlier, because again, $1 today, we can offer you like a really great discount. If you can't pay today, then we can be flexible on what those payment terms are. So I think it's all about how do we get the customer in the door, whether that's even if the product is not available for like general availability yet, how can we get the customer in the door and then worry about, how we'll pay for it later.
Cool. Any tools or platforms that you recommend for closing the loop on referrals? Anything you've seen work really well in terms of tracking and closing the loop?
I think I think tracking, most tools have that, but I think a lot of it is actually just in how you yourself are positioning it and how you integrate how you describe and integrate the referral in your product UI. Mm-hmm. So I showed the Crisp example because I really liked how they give that visual feedback every single time I go to use the product, because you have to go and like mute your mic every time you want to do it. So every time I go and use it, I'm reminded, we gave you something for free because you told friends about it. And so what do I think? I think I want to keep doing this. And that's the other thing is like, how do you make referrals rather than like a one-time action? How do you make it an ongoing practice for people?
Yeah.
So I actually think that the best way is like natively within your product and to build it into, instead of thinking about it as like a messaging layer or like a marketing thing that you tacked on afterward, how do you integrate referrals directly into the product flow, into the product experience? And in that case, I think it needs to be part of the look and feel of the product.
Cool. We're coming up just on time. I'm going to look at the chat if anybody has any last minute questions. If not, we didn't get to all of them because you guys had so many, but I will, some came in, I will respond to those specific questions offline and get back to those folks. But thank you so much, Susan. This was awesome. So many great stories and so many great perspectives on where growth is headed. So we really appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody else who joined. We hope you have a great weekend, and stay tuned for what's next on our webinar series. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Susan.